Welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I'm Bob Arnold, President here at DRJ. We thank you for joining us today and we hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. Everyone's phone has been muted when we ask you to utilize the question panel you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. Our speakers today will attempt to answer as many of these as possible at the end of today's session. Today's sponsor is Strategic BCP. Strategic BCP is a business continuity risk management software and consulting company. Today's topic is BIA paradigm shift, ensuring success utilizing a value stream approach. Our speakers today include Lori Norman, Chris Duffy, and Frank Perlmutter. Lori Norman is the Director of Global Resilience at WEX. WEX is a client of Strategic BCP and they're a leading provider of corporate payment solutions representing more than 9 million vehicles across a wide spectrum of business sectors. Lori is the former manager of corporate emergency management at Express Jet Airlines and director of business continuity at QTS data centers, as well as a retired sergeant from the Atlanta Police Department. Chris has over 25 years in IT and business continuity. Chris is the former senior consultant with City of Philadelphia, New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission, South Carolina Department of Education, as well as the former CIO at Pierce College. Frank Perlmutter is the president and co-founder of Strategic BCP, creators of Resilience One BCM software. He has 18 years of experience in business continuity and risk management and is the former consultant with the Big Four, plus manager of DR and COOP and risk manager for the U.S. Department of Treasury. With no further introductions, I'd like to welcome and turn the mic over to Frank.
All right, thanks a lot, Bob. We're really excited today to be presenting on the value stream approach. It's been a topic which has been extremely popular throughout the industry for a good part of the last year. We're at 3 different locations today. Lori is in Atlanta, Chris in New Jersey, and myself in Pennsylvania. So on the slides today, we're actually going to be going back and forth a little bit on there. So we definitely appreciate you attending today, and we hope you find what we're going over today very valuable. So in today's session, what we're going to do, we're going to go over some of the traditional planning methods, or in fact, a lot of the methods that people are still currently using within their business continuity planning. There's a paradigm shift going on into risk management and obviously into greater efficiencies within business continuity program management. And we're going to go over how the value stream approach dovetails into this paradigm shift and how it can really help improve your program, streamline it, and most importantly, make you more valuable. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over the next portion of the presentation, or I guess I should say the initial part of the presentation, over to Chris.
So thank you, Frank. So let's talk a little bit about the traditional approach to a plan is actually going through from the governance standpoint, building and conducting those department level BIAs, and from there building the standard operating procedures for those critical processes, sometimes depending on regulated or not. Then looking at those inflows and outflows for the business processes, all the resources that you're going to use to support those business functions, and then finally take a look and build those recovery plans at the department level. And there's a view that when we take a look at the view for that, again, it is focused on the department or that silo. You know, when we do plans, it's looking at the negative impacts. You look at risks to the facilities, you're looking at the impacts if I can't do the process. So there's a negative overtones to it. And there's that, I've got to do this because of the regulators. And and then lastly, and more importantly, is being able to do that from a resiliency standpoint of having the department see the value to be able to recover plans and continue business operations. So where do we go from here is that true shift, is taking that from those siloed department plans into the value stream, which is going to give us that organizational unification at a high level. instead of the negative connotations that we get from a BIA, it's going to be the strategic. So we go from tactical to strategic in that. And it's positive, it's growth, is, hey, let's talk about acquisitions. You know, what if we did this? How would it impact us via the value stream? And throughout this presentation, you can see some of this, is that it's now taking it up at a higher level, not from a compliance point, but again, from that strategic. So you're getting that visibility and that communications at a senior leadership level. So Frank, you want to take us through that process?
Sure. Yeah, it's really, you know, it's and I'm sure some of you have seen this this slide before, the weight test versus the weight test. So, you know, we've really moved on from those big binders. I mean, you know, primarily those are utilized for compliance, but really out in the field, we're looking at something that's more real time, that's more actionable. It's the weight test, okay, not the WEIGHT, but the WAIT test is really focused on that risk management stance on there, on being more streamlined. It revolves around that successful execution and how quickly we can respond to and recover from and limit impact. And I think in looking at some of this fundamental shift in focus, you can see on here that within this blue area, you have your plan generation and your call lists. You have your IT plans for doing your technical recovery and recovering your infrastructure. You have your business recovery plans for operating without your typical infrastructure, without your people and your facilities and your information technology. And then obviously the crisis management plans on there for that initial response and taking you through all that decision making, and we all know what call lists are. So the shift is really going from just that plan generation activity, the ultimate goal of that, to really something that is more risk management and business process focused, okay? So what we're doing is that we're looking at performing our risk assessments, understanding our business operations better. We have a downtime impact analysis, but we're actually going to change the verbiage around that too. We're not going to call it that. The reason why is because, as Chris said, that negative connotation, impact, negative, disaster, negative, value, positive, sort of like the above and the below the line kind of terms on there. Okay, the below the line terms are the terms where we're talking about that impact and bad things that happen to the company. But in value stream, we're talking about the return that we can bring to the company. And when we're more positive, when we're actually bringing that value, it makes us, as business continuity professionals, exponentially more relevant in what we're doing, because we're not just there after a disaster happens, we're there all the time, bringing value to all of our constituencies in our company. Okay, so in going through and in looking at how we want to implement that value stream, there's a couple of different steps in doing that. So how exactly does this work? And you'll notice that there's some familiar activities, you know, things you'll be like, oh, we already do that already. And then there's some other activities that you may not be doing at all. And typically we see, and we'll show you where those different activities are of some of the new concepts and some of the things that are those more traditional, but we're changing them a little bit just to make them that value stream approach, that more positive approach. So here's the steps within the value stream approach. What you'll notice is that what we're doing is we're building up. We have another slide where we actually show it from the top down, because it starts with that organizational mission from the top of that organization. Here, understand that this is more of, these are the different steps. So we're going to build on each of the steps in here. The first thing that we start with is understanding the organizational mission. What is it that your organization is setting out to do? okay? And every organization, small or large, has that mission statement. What exactly is it? Are we here to generate revenue? Is it to service our, is it to service our customers? Are we a government organization where we're, where we're serving the people within our district or within our different area? What exactly is it that we're trying to accomplish? The next thing that we do is we identify the organizational objectives that align with that overall mission. Okay, and that's typically made up. We typically see anywhere from, like, on the low end, maybe 3 of those organizational objectives, all the way up to maybe like 10 or 15 of those maximum on there. So exactly, how does that break down? How does that mission break down in our particular organization? We'll get into more specifics on what that is. The next thing that we do is we prioritize the processes by how they support the organizational objectives. Now, typically, we would call this, okay, well, that's our business impact analysis. What we want to do is we want to see what are the most important processes, activities, business functions that we are doing in our organization. The reason why they're important is because they most support, what makes them critical is they most support those particular organizational objectives. Okay, so you can see we're going to talk a little bit, those first 3 things. It's a little, maybe very similar to what you're doing right now, but there's a slightly different approach on each of those 3 areas, and we'll get into that in the slides that follow. Okay, now here's where it really changes, and this is typically a new concept for a lot of folks. Grouping the similar critical processes into value streams. So as Chris mentioned, there are departmental plans, okay? Departmental plans are not done by value stream. Value streams cross different departments, okay? So what we're doing is we're going to group those processes together. Doesn't matter where they are in the organization. And that's the way that we're going to develop our recovery plans. That's the way that we're going to identify any type of risks within the organization, and most importantly, that's the way we're going to identify ways that the different pieces and parts of the organization, of the process itself, and everything from the people to the vendors to the information technology to the facility, all those different infrastructure components, to how they provide value to that overall organization. That's really where it's very different, and we'll show you how that works and what the benefits of that are in the slides that follow. And then one of the other things too, and Chris said sometimes we're mapping standard operating procedures for each of these value streams, sometimes. And it's interesting because not everybody maps how you actually perform that process. Okay, so if I'm doing, say, like a call center function, how do I answer that particular phone call? Okay, and maybe I answer phone calls across a lot of those different departments. How exactly do I do that? Now, that can be at any level of detail, but it's really important that we understand the basic operational premise around completing that process. Okay, so we at least have a couple of those different steps in there. Doesn't have to be a user guide, but it should at least provide an overview of how exactly that particular process works. It's really important because if we don't understand that process, how can we possibly talk intelligently about providing value around perspective? How can we actually write up a plan around a value stream, which is operating under duress, if we don't understand how we operate normally? So that process, that piece of this is very, very, very important. Okay. So with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn over the next slides over to Lori, and Lori's going to talk about identifying the organizational objectives to the mission. And what you'll notice is that you have your red and then you have your blue. The red is your typical traditional way. The blue is where you're creating that value. And you'll notice the shift in semantics on here, which is really important. Okay.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, so Frank stole a little bit of my thunder there, but so this is an example of how taking a little different approach to something we've all been doing, and this is mapping those organizational objectives to how they support the mission, right? We've all done that. But following the old methodology, the focus would really have been on the negative impact and would highlight what is minimally acceptable to maintain the operation and brand reputation. Using the value stream methodology really sort of shifts that focus from the negative impact, minimally acceptable, to one of maximum value creation. As we see in this graphic, this really illustrates the shift from the impact focus, kind of get us by during recovery objectives in red, over to those illustrated in blue that create the day-to-day value to the organization. Some of the examples of this are, as we're seeing, customer retention and brand protection shifts over to how do we acquire and retain customers. Continue authorizing and paying transactions shifts to how are we providing value-added products and services. Keep them coming, Frank.
Okay, there you go.
Ensuring customers have access to services and support, which is, the bare minimum. Now we're focusing on how do we manage service for better delivery outcomes. The employee morale and retention. Now we're focusing on how do we empower our employees to deliver more innovative solutions. This shift in focus really helps to reframe the perception that the entire organization has of business continuity from that cost of doing business, which we're all very familiar with being in that boat, right, to a value-add function that truly supports the organizational objectives. And unless, Frank, unless you or Chris have anything to add to that, I'm going to turn it back over to Frank to discuss how we prioritize processes by how they support those organizational objectives.
Sure, that's great. Yeah. And that's great. Yeah, it's when you look at this, it's interesting. You don't normally see the blue being the blue items in here being associated with business continuity planning. Red, yes. Blue, no. And it's good colors that you pick too, because blue, calm, normal, red, emergency, those different kind of things. So I think that's another really good way to look at it too. When we go on in and we're prioritizing those processes by how they support those organizational objectives. So, as Lori was showing you at WEX, they're utilizing those as opposed to the impacts, those are the values that are being created. So when you go in and you do your typical business impact analysis, she's not doing a business impact analysis. She's doing a business value analysis. What are we doing in each of those different activities that brings value to that particular organization? And whether you're talking impact or you're talking value, either way, you're still prioritizing those different business processes, which is what's essentially the goal of a BIA, no matter what you call it. So here's how you do this. You can see on here, one of the big things that WEX does and that is recommended in the value stream is don't rule anything out right off the bat, okay? So don't take out any of your processes or activities across the organization. In other words, don't say that from off the bat you go, oh, this department doesn't have any value, or these processes don't have any value. Give them all a fair shake in there. Because what we find, and I know what WEX found too, is that there were some things they said, oh, this didn't matter, or this was of primary importance. And really the criticality was misgauged. It was more the subjectivity of some of those executives, and when they really wound up looking at how they aligned with organizational objectives, they saw a very different picture. Lori doesn't call it a BIA. Lori calls it a business value analysis. And in the value stream, very simple change in term. So take out impact, put in the word value. It becomes something different. It's actually interesting. We actually did a little bit of a test at some of our clients, and we had the folks that the business continuity professionals go to their executives and try out that test and say, hey, we're doing a business value analysis this year. Not very different, but the executives liked it so much better, like, oh, good, I don't have to do that BIA anymore. Well, you are still doing the BIA, but they're going in with a different attitude, and the attitude on how that's being conducted is really important to, obviously, to your success in getting that done. It emphasizes that business continuity management is that day-to-day activity. You can see by bringing that value. And you're showing how you're not just there after the incident happens, that you're proactively protecting your organization, which is really, really important. Now, Lori's going to talk a bit about how you're streamlining this. So this is the really important part. This is where you're doing those groupings. This is the different part here. So, Lori, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Yeah, so using this approach, we were really able to streamline not only our recovery processes, but the supporting documentation. By grouping related and supporting critical business processes into groups or value streams, as opposed to individual departments, and then creating recovery plans by those value streams, we reduced the number of individual recovery plans significantly. We also created a much more coordinated and efficient recovery process. So far, I think we've been able to consolidate 162 departmental plans into 5 value stream plans. So that's a significant difference. We've also seen a tremendous increase in interdepartmental communication and coordination, which has resulted in efficiencies realized through process consolidation in some of our customer support and maintenance functions. And those efficiencies, they translate to cost reduction. And cost reduction is a message that always resonates with senior management, right? One of the major benefits of this approach for my organization is that it provided the foundation we needed to perform that enterprise planning process that looks at strategic business impacts and prioritizes business functions. And it also provided the functional view that helps to ensure you're not overlooking any critical interdependencies, and it can help prevent gaps and misalignments when cross-departmental interdependencies are identified. Unless you guys have anything to add to this slide, we'll move to the next slide for a little closer look at how this actually works. Okay, so here's an example of how we grouped several critical business functions spanning multiple departments, even across different segments of business within the WEX enterprise, into a single customer service value stream. You probably immediately notice that there are 3 different strategic account functions. These are really very similar functions supporting the large account maintenance, and they span 3 different segments of our business. This was clearly an obvious grouping. It produced immediate benefits through cross-training of associates, and it helped to create an extra layer of redundancy for each of those functions. We also identified the strategic accounts implementation functions, which are related to those maintenance functions, and quickly realized the same benefits across all 3 of those functions as well. You'll see the additional related functions in this value stream are inside and outside sales. Excuse me, I'm going to drink a little water here. Am I still connected?
Yeah. Yes, yep. Okay, you're still going. Yep.
Okay.
Armstrong.
Okay, we have, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Inside and outside sales, our call center, we have custom billing, and several functions within WEX Bank that we also identified that were related and shared the same primary objective, which is providing continuous support and service to our customers, right? This particular...
Laura, I think it'd be a good thing to point out here that they're all not in one location or even within one, within the WEX name. You've got WEX Bank there. You've got, diversity that, how often do these guys talk with each other?
Yeah, absolutely, and they're across different segments of the business and don't, or they didn't communicate very often at all. I think that's changed now since this.
Yeah, you use the expression "throw it out over the wall."
Yeah, exactly. I think that was one of the things that we saw when we pulled all these people together was, when we asked them to walk through their recovery steps, it was, well, my department performs 1, 2, and 3, and then we throw it across the wall to the next guy. And it became pretty evident quickly that, you can't recover in isolation as a business. So they very quickly came together and realized that what they do impacts the other department and in turn the entire business. And actually this particular grouping or value stream was really one of my favorites because it is such a great illustration of how this approach, it really complements that traditional approach of viewing business continuity by vertical lines of business or departments with this horizontal process or functional view that really aligns with how our business transactions flow within our enterprise to generate value. This functional view that we took and the resulting analysis also identified some great opportunities to add value for the organization through identification of some costly inefficiencies. We'll actually talk more about the value derived around that activity on the next slide, unless Frank or Chris have anything to add on this.
I think that I have one minor thing. I think that when you're looking at this too, what you're seeing is that there's you mentioned the redundancies, and redundancy is bad operationally during a recovery. It's actually that's a good thing because when people are answering a phone call, or doing another customer service related activity, one in one area is very similar to one in the other area, and they get to see how that's done. We've seen that during a disaster. It's you have the 1,500 people that are in critical functions, and you bought 100 recovery seats, or let's just say it's 700 recovery seats. Who are the 800 who aren't going in? And typically, people are looking for cross-trained, personnel, and that's really this helps with that too. I want to mention. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and that's what that's exactly where the value in that layer of redundancy came from. It's not in the day-to-day operations, but yeah, in a recovery situation, we were able to let strategic accounts for Fleet 1 handle some of the strategic accounts for Millennium or Classic call load.
Hey, Laura, I think one of the big things, and you guys were talking about it, is in that cross training is we've got two locations. You got Chattanooga taking inbound calls for one area, and you've got corporate doing another area. And when we were going through the gaps for analysis, is we were able to, instead of having to worry about redundant PBXs, is to the failover for cross training from one location to the other, as well as the day-to-day operation of handling overflow of calls because they're cross-trained. It didn't matter who took the call.
Yeah,
that was huge.
That's right. Yeah.
There's just wanted to mention, I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning, there are questions coming in. We're going to handle those all at the end, but keep them coming in. We're getting quite a few, so we're going to try to leave enough time at the end to answer everything too. So we appreciate you guys asking them as we're going through the slides. And what I'll try to do, I'm notating where we are in the presentation so that I can bring up the right slide to go with your questions at the end.
Right, Frank, you want to take us into
Sure.
operational risk?
Absolutely. Okay. Okay. So mapping business processes. Okay. When we're looking at how we're doing it. So I mentioned before the level of detail. So we always get asked this. It's like, how detailed do I need to make a standard operating procedure? And there's really no right answer for that. I mean, Chris maps a little differently than how I do. Lori maps a little bit differently than how Chris does. It's really up to how comfortable you feel, with, or how comfortable a user feels, or the person in that department feels with that particular standard operating procedure. So somebody might want, it's like I like them very, very detailed. Chris, a little bit less so. So when you're looking at this, there's no wrong way. You want to put at a minimum the core normal operational steps. So, I'll go back to take a phone call. It's a real easy one. Phone answers. You pick up the phone. Okay, I need a phone to do that. I pick it up. Okay, I'm going to access maybe a database of answers to the questions on that customer service inquiry on there. I may document it in a particular application on there, okay? And then I may route that call depending on what it's about. So some of those basic steps and the resources, really important, the resources that you use. And that, you know, some people are calling these dependencies or interdependencies. We call them support components. You can call them supporting resources. That different technology and the people and the assets in there is really important to link on there. So the key to understanding value as you're going through this value stream and where that procedure, you know, that standard operating procedure helps you is you can look at the points along the process where value is derived or value is lost. So when we're meeting a customer service, okay, a customer service inquiry, we are looking at those touch points with the customer. Where are we taking that particular, you know, from the initial intake of that call, very important, to the resolution of the issue on there, you know, retention. I believe Lori had retention of customers. Those different types of things are really where we can focus on where that value is derived. And along a process, you're utilizing different resources, okay? It may be different people. It may be different, like the telephone is maybe used throughout, but you may have different applications where you're putting that, like I said, you're putting that information in, or the systems that are supporting that, and you can really see from an enterprise perspective where that value is derived, not just in a single department, but across all those different departments. And as we mentioned before, those are key to performing recovery. If you don't understand how you normally operate, you're not going to understand how you'd operate under extreme duress. And it highly facilitates mapping of your workaround. So when you're going in and you're doing your business recovery plans, and you're going in there, if you have, say, a 7-step process for doing a particular activity, you can see what that is and go, okay, now you're breaking it down. How would I actually get that call? How would I shift that call? The next step, how would I log that? Maybe I'm doing that, you know, on a, I'm logging it in a manual paper log or in a spreadsheet or something like that. But it helps you because you make sure that you're not missing anything along that process too. So it's normal operations, really helpful in deriving that value and bringing the value to the organization. And obviously your typical business continuity activities brings value in there too. So some specific things that we're doing within, I guess you could call this within business continuity, operational risk management, process remediation. Okay, so let's call this a corollary activity of business continuity. So there's your, your typical BIA and your plans and everything, and then there's obviously that operational risk management and that process remediation, which is a key part of doing this. The foundation are those mappings and obviously the BIA metrics, okay, around derived value. So what exactly is that? So if I take a particular resource or I take a particular vendor or person or something, they bring value by how they support the business. So that all connects up in that value stream. We look and we say, are there any inefficiencies or vulnerabilities in those highest value activities? So what do we look for along the process? Okay, we look for excessive manual steps. So if I say, okay, first thing I do is something comes in and I hand it off to Chris, who hands it off to Lori, who hands it back to me, then I hand it back to Chris and back to me. That is an excessive manual handoffs in there. So obviously that's an extreme example. But when we're starting, where we're passing the process, we're playing hot potato with the process in there, there's bigger chances for problems in that process. It's obviously inefficient, but it's also prone to mistakes. As Lori mentioned, repeated activities, especially across departments, it's like, guess what I'm doing? I'm doing this activity. Oh, I'm doing that too. Oh, you know what? I'm doing that too. And guess what? We're doing it in 3 different ways. We see that again and again and again. When all of those folks come together in a single value stream like Lori showed, they wind up where they share what they're doing. They say, okay, well, how do you normally do it? This is how, and then they don't even get to recovery right off the bat. They talk about those best practices and they say, gosh, wouldn't that be great if we could do it in the same way? It's like, oh, you're doing it this way? this doesn't go through to all these people? Oh, no. No, this is more streamlined. And that's how you can get a lot of those inefficiencies, so spotting those red flags. Solutions, like I just said, collaborative decision-making, it's huge. And the best part is that when you're all together, and you have that in there, when you budget, you can budget for solutions that are best helping the organization, not a siloed department, but that best help the organization. You're bringing value real time. And that's what's so important about being and offering that additional value as a business continuity professional. Enterprise risk management is where we're looking. So we were just talking about the operations, the business process itself. So all those resources that are supporting that particular business operation. We call this value-driven enterprise risk management. Okay. Are there any inefficiencies or vulnerabilities, not in the process, but in the infrastructure, the people, and the facilities and the assets, and the technology that supports the operation of that business process? I'm going to start with this second bullet here, and I'm going to actually go back to this, this expertise one. When we look at effective high-value mitigation alternatives, or let's call it value alternatives, when we look overutilization of resources or underutilization of resources, and we see this all the time, when you link things up, when you link up, say, those applications, facilities, assets, databases, people, all those vendors, up to that, you may start to see, you know what, there's, this resource isn't really supporting our organizational objectives, or isn't as important as another resource in supporting those particular organizational objectives. That is an area where you can find efficiencies and cut costs, like what Lori did. You can also see in here, too, is that there's the overutilization. We've seen in here, it's like, gosh, this supports all of these different processes and across the organization, across all these facilities and all of these different organizational objectives on here. It's a major process, and it becomes extremely evident. Those are things where we want to put more resources on there. We want to provide more value and make that process better so that we can better derive value for the organization. And from a business continuity perspective, we want to provide more redundancy in that so that we make sure that it doesn't stop being operational at any time, so it continues to support our business. The other thing is that when we look at some of these different areas, one of the biggest things is that people establish an expertise in one of these areas, the supporting areas of the organization, and it's really helpful. So if you become a technology expert, and a lot of people are, this is, BCP used to be disaster recovery. Now we're into risk management. We have all these different terms, but there's a lot of folks that understand some very specific technology areas. How can I really help within those areas? You almost become that, you're a business continuity person that has visibility into the business and into the technology. And that's always a big challenge for the technology folks. How am I bringing value to the business? People, we see that, HR, those cross-training activities, those different types of things. We don't see a lot of people within the facility area, where they have a specialty within the facility, but having that space and the utilization of that space is extremely important in delivering value. In manufacturing organizations, it's of just, that is that and the equipment is of primary importance to delivering the value to that organization. So having an expertise in one of these three areas, or in multiple ones, even better, really can help in you bringing value to the organization. Before I go on to the next slide, I want to say, Chris, Lori, do you have any other points on this, on some specific examples, or would you like to hop into the next slide?
I think the next slide actually is the example that really talks about all underutilization or economies of scale.
Sure. All right, let's hop into our example then. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so while we were at WEX, there was 2 payment processing systems that were identified across the organization. And Lori, how long have they been in place together?
I think about almost 4 years.
And there was no traction in it was talked about, but no real traction in getting it done. So if you take a look at, we look at the number of departments. Again, we looked at, what we had done together for, BIA work, and we had 12 departments. Go ahead, Frank. There you go. So we had 12 departments, and we look at those business processes across them. You had about 32 business processes, and related on the DR side was 9 IT recovery plans focused on these 2 separate platforms. So looking at those organizational objectives, and I thought this was really great, is, and again, it's been talked about, you're hearing it, within the organization, there was, it's managing those services for better delivery outcomes. Go ahead, Frank. And then, back to what Lori said about empowering employees, they were talking about it. And it allowed them to focus on acquiring those new customers by doing that unification. And Lori, feel free to add in at this point. I think you did a superb job in being able to, bring to fruition from the value stream something that had been sitting there.
Yeah, and I think that's key. This had been talked about, and the inefficiencies on some level, they were aware of them, but this enabled us to present them in such an effective way that we really got the traction we needed. And instead of it being so focused on the negatives, we were able to show, okay, there are some negative impacts related to this, or inefficiencies, but here's the value. And, we didn't just focus on that. We were able to illustrate the value that this consolidation would bring, and that's really, I think, what enabled us to get the traction and get this implemented.
Right, and this was in conjunction with the CIO who had been trying to do this. And I mean, really, when was the last time you saw somebody in business continuity driving, a platform consolidation project? And then, as you see, the benefits were huge. There was no more quote, and that was a term they would use, throw it over the wall, is because they got to see the unification of, hey, well, we're doing this, well, I need it for that, and also identifying those inefficiencies that Frank talked about. And yeah, so there was a huge benefit analysis in that savings, basically sunsetting an entire platform. And, again, back to not only so with the call centers is, now I've got more people able to learn the single system, and at the same time, IT is able to take their already strained resources, as is with most organizations, and reduce those plans as well as the business ones. And the last one was probably the most rewarding in working with Lori is the departments own the process now. It was, they see it. They go, oh my gosh, well, if I'm not doing this, they were identifying their self-identification of inefficiencies. It was no longer needed to be led or facilitated. They owned it. That to me was the culmination of being able to see the value stream as an effective cultural process. I don't know if you can guess, Lori. I mean, you saw that same thing. I remember looking at you during that meeting. All right. So, when we take a look at from there is some of those challenges, and I saw this specifically with Lori, is that, and Lori, feel free to speak to this one as well, on going from the BIA to the value stream.
Yeah, so getting that departmental buy-in and understanding of the new process and the value that it would bring. Understanding the importance of really breaking down the departmental silos and recognizing the interdepartmental dependencies. I think one of my favorite examples is that evolution from the first day in the room that we talked about earlier, where it was, literally, that is exactly what they said. Well, I do my part and toss it over the wall. And sort of watch that evolve from I own my part and that's it, and I'm only affected by my part. To seeing them understand that, it truly is. It's a team effort. Everything impacts something else. You could see the light bulb starting to come on as they started to think as a team. So it was a great exercise, and it was really rewarding to watch that play out. We really, when we were able to identify some sensible grouping that resulted in some efficient value streams, they really started to get it, and we started to identify more, and they would think, oh, well, there's another function over here that probably would fit into this, and the entire group would talk it through. So it was a great process to watch.
And that official rebranding, I know Lori won't say this, so I'll say it for her, is when I started working with Lori, she was the manager of business continuity, and then disaster recovery was given to her. And I don't know, I'd like to attribute the value stream, and I do believe that has an impact other than her outstanding work. She's now the Director of Global Resiliency.
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, but I do think that we can attribute a lot of that visibility and really, like you said, or Frank said earlier, the relevance of what we're doing now is it's much more relevant to the C-suite, to the executive team. They understand it. They are perceiving it differently. The entire organization is, and it really is about just changing the approach.
Yeah, recasting how it is. I mean, I'm looking at a lot of the questions that are coming in right now, and rebranding is a great way of saying it. It's like, some of the questions aren't we still kind of doing X? Like we've always been doing this. It's like, absolutely. Like we were saying, it's definitely a shift in how you're presenting it in a lot of these different ways, rather than really a shift in what we're doing. I'm going to go back to I think yeah, there we go. Yeah, the question slide is next on there. So what we can do now is we can answer some of those, and I'm going to bring up just a couple of the slides on here. I'm going to try to answer the questions in logical groupings, I guess in logical value streams, right? And how they were. So let me, I'm going to just shift out of, go ahead.
Let me just sort of speak to that, what you just said. I had the same somewhat skeptical view when Chris was approaching me with this. I said, look, I'm already doing a lot of this stuff. So as I started to get it, and started to actually put it into practice, and started to realize, hey, this is about just how we're presenting this. It's just sometimes it's a simple shift in semantics. We're focusing. We're just shifting the focus from the negative impact, the old way of doing business, to what are we doing day to day to bring value to the organization. And it literally is just reframing how you're perceived, and that makes such a difference. I have to say I was really amazed when I started seeing the results, and they really have paid off over the past year for me.
Great, excellent. Yeah, I think when you look at these steps on here, I think the biggest thing is, when you look at the first three on here, this is just recasting and rebranding, I think, for the most part on here. I mean, it's very important, but the great part is you're already doing a lot of this. This is where we start, where we get different on here, and there's a lot of questions on how exactly this works on here. We'll go over all of these, and obviously, and there's some questions on standard operating procedures. So I'll go straight down the on some of these here, and just read these off. By the way, I'm the only one that can actually see these right now. So Chris and Lori, we'll give them a little bit of time to answer these too. Coming up, because this is going to be the first time that they're hearing them when I read them. To identify the critical processes, don't we still need to do the business impact analysis or downtime impact analysis, even though it is based on the negative? Would the business value analysis have the same questions? So that's That's actually got a pretty easy answer. I'll give that answer on there. Absolutely. You're still doing, you know, a BIA. That's those things where you're recasting that. And that's a great question because, you know, it's like I say, how much revenue you're going to lose if you stop doing X? And you say, how much revenue does this process bring to the organization? So you can see, have I really changed that around? It's pretty much the same question, just said in a value way, you know, in a more positive way than in that negative impact way. Chris, Laura, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that it's exactly right. Is you do need to go through that traditional approach, and again, from, you know, looking at the standards and guidelines, it's doing it at that level, and that then drives what you're using. I mean, I think we did a lot behind the scenes before we even got in front of the departments with the groupings.
Yeah, we did, and you're absolutely right. You're still doing the BIA. I mean, you're still getting that information. You're just reframing the way you're communicating it, I guess. And when your focus is on value, that's what's being perceived by the people you're communicating it to. Instead of, if you're constantly communicating negative impact, that's the way they start. That's the way they think of you. You know, you're right. You're like Jim Jeffrey showing up on the beach. Everybody leaves. You know. So, you know, you want to. If you're framing everything as far as this is the value we're bringing, that's the way they start to look at you, and it really does make you more relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always, like, you know, it's we had there's a presentation that we've given before, and it's on like how people perceive you in the organization, and it's like, oh, here comes you know, Chicken Little, you know, it's here comes the doomsday prognosticator, and it's sort of like, is that really how you want to be perceived on there? It's like, that's not great. You know, you want to be seen in a more positive light on there. You know, generally those type of images don't, you know, or perceptions don't bode well for the professional. That we had a core question on here. Can you give us the business definition of a value stream? I can give you mine on here. I think when you look at a value stream on here, it's those critical business processes that are aligning with the organizational objectives. So in other words, what we're doing is when you lay out those organizational objectives and you do your evaluation on there, what you're doing is you're grouping them together. So it was kind of like what Lori did here, where Lori grouped everything. You can see here's the value stream of customer service. So any of the things that were hitting that customer service function went into that same funnel on there, and we're together on there. You guys have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think it's like we said before. You're sort of you're complementing the old vertical line view with the horizontal process, that functional view that really aligns with how the business transactions flow within the enterprise to generate value. That's to me what it is.
Excellent. Another question that's sort of a corollary of that, how valuable was mapping the interdependencies to facilitate the grouping of the value stream? So in other words, the interrelationships in between each of these different items on here. I think I can take a little stab at that and supplement a little bit. I think some of those things don't have it. You know, it's like, I don't think that they even knew that they had interdependencies, you know, that they were all utilizing, like, you know, the same resource. You know, like, and this is a great slide if you look at like strategic accounts, Millennium, Fleet, and Classic. Lori, I don't know this obviously as well as you do. Were any of these areas or accounts acquired through, like, you know, any type of merger or acquisition, you know, M&A activities, anything like that?
Yeah, sure, quite a few.
Oh, they were? Okay, all right. So at one point they never did talk to one another. I mean, do they really have a reason to talk to one another?
No, not really.
Yeah, not really. Yeah.
They kind of existed in their own little bubbles. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting that we would think that you know, like core products, you know, we're selling our product, we're servicing our product, you're servicing your product, you know, we're selling, you know, they're selling their product, and they never have a reason to talk to one another. But the value stream it's the organization is its products, and shouldn't they be sharing those different, processes together? So when you look at that, I think that they were all sort of doing the same thing, and the interdependencies or the dependencies on those particular support components and resources, I think watching that was probably the most important thing that we've seen, across our different client base. Okay, let me see. Well, we just got in a bunch more questions here. Hold on, let me just see. Let me just scroll here a little bit. Okay. Okay. This sounds like an operational efficiency activity, not a resilience-focused activity. How do you differentiate between the two concepts? All right, so that's great. I'll tell you, I think everybody does it a little bit differently. Like we've said, we're utilizing, we're pretty much doing the same thing. Is it a resilience activity? Yes. Is it a value-driven activity? Yes. It serves two purposes. It's just the way that we're branding it, and that, in those activities that we're saying it a little differently. Because a BIA is essentially, that's a business value analysis. We're just saying that the value is derived on there. I'll tell you, it's interesting. When you go and you present this, I think the differentiation where we see it, I think, is in the presentation to your audience. Are these folks that are interested in the resilience, or are these folks that are interested in the operational, or in both? And we wind up where we say that it's interesting. I think that we've always had, the resilience part we do all of us do pretty well. But then the value part is with the executives almost always want to see the value part. It's like, yeah, I'm happy you got your plans, great. And that happens, unfortunately, all too much. So I think that the audience is kind of the differentiator on that. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well enough.
That's about it? Okay.
I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't really add anything to that, Frank. I think you said it perfectly.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. How large of an organization is WEX, and how large is the BC staff? Trying to put a perspective on implementing into a large, diverse organization. Thank you.
Okay. We have, let's see, 20 some odd locations across the globe. We have about close to 3,000 employees. The BC staff, official full-time BC staff, don't laugh at this, but there are two of us. We have created a virtual BC team. So what we did as part of this process was create local accountability across the globe. So for each location, or for IT, for PR, we have someone who's responsible for each platform. And so we have a lot of dotted line reporting, or I just call it a virtual team. It's very lean by design and by necessity. It's more of an adapt and overcome design. But yeah, it's a very small staff. But like you said, I had to create subject matter experts, business continuity, for emergency response, for physical security, and for ITDR. And we have a committee, a steering committee.
And it works. You know what? In terms of size of organizations, too, it's one of the big things that we've seen is that wind up where we have a very large organization, and they have one planner. And by large organization, I'm talking like global. Over. Some of them have over 100,000 employees around the world. I mean, we're talking large here, and not a lot of resources, which is always the norm. We actually did. There was a presentation we did called "Succeeding as the Loan Planner and Business Continuity," and the two organizations in there were Cisco Systems and the Gap. So you can imagine, I mean, with very large organizations with one or two planners in there right now. So in doing this, I think what it does is it really helps you be more efficient. The days of, I mean, we definitely have folks that are doing, thousands of plans, but wouldn't it be great if you could actually reduce that down and sort of reel that in and make that more manageable? I think that's what people are seeing, is that everybody doesn't need to have this plan that operates in the silo. What we need better of is the collaboration. It all goes down to that command and control in there too, which is obviously the essence of business continuity.
Yeah, and on that note, really quick, Frank, I do have another position I'm going to be hiring for at the end of the year, so if any of you guys are interested, keep your eyes open.
Okay. Well, it looks like I know Bob's about to ping me here and say that we're out of time. I apologize. We didn't get through all the questions. We had about 20 of them here. What we're going to try to do, we're going to save those, and hopefully we can get your email addresses on here. Send those out. I also wanted to point out one other thing too. There's a full case study on WEX. That's right up on our website on strategicbcp.com, along with these other presentations that I've talked about too, and white papers. So obviously we didn't go through all the detail. I mean, we really, there's a lot of questions about what the heck does this plan look like? I know how we currently do it. How do you group these things better? How does that actual documentation look? How are you bringing it all together? And we're more than happy to answer those questions too. Here's our email addresses. If you want to submit a contact form too, we'll be happy to get that to the right person at contact@strategicbcp.com. So thank you very much today. Really appreciate it. And Bob, would you like to close us out?
Most certainly. Thanks, Frank. And again, thanks everyone for joining us here today. There were many questions we didn't get to. As Frank stated, they will have access to these questions following the webinar, so we'll follow up with everyone that needs following up with. So thanks again, everyone, for your attendance today. We again hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. DRJ would also like to thank Laurie, Chris, Frank for their time here today, as well as Strategic BCP for sponsoring today's webinar. We will be emailing everyone a link to the recording as well. You may view this recording as frequently as you wish or share it with your peers. If you do have any additional questions, you can contact the presenters with their contact information there on the screen, or DRJ directly. Thanks again, and this now ends today's webinar.